I'm like, Mom, I made you this, my first ornament ever. And so a couple of years ago, she came back with the first ornament. She said, can I trade this in for one that looks good? Because I gave her my first one. My first one was really ugly because it was my first one, but I was so proud of it.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah, now she wants the nice stuff since I'm a much better glass blower.
Scratch Entrepreneur. True stories of remarkable people who dropped everything to turn an idea into a healthy, profitable business.
Hey, this is Jeremy Goodrich. I'm the owner of Shine Insurance Agency and your host for the Scratch Entrepreneur podcast. I'm here today with Abby Gitlitz. She is an artist, a glass blower, and the founder of the Bloomington Creative Glass, or just Bloomington Creative Glass. Abby, thanks.
Well, it's actually the Bloomington Creative Glass Center.
The Bloomington Creative Glass Center.
Or as we call it, BCGC.
Okay, cool.
Because Bloomington Creative Glass Center is a real mouthful.
Yeah, well, and I like acronyms.
Yeah.
I was a school teacher for a long time.
And BCGC is fun to say.
It is. It has sort of a roll off the tongue.
It
BCGC.
does.
I like it. Cool. Well, Abby, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me here.
So we always start off the show sharing a little bit about podcasts we're listening to. So are there any podcasts that you're listening to?
Well, honestly, I do a lot of audiobooks right now.
Okay.
Because
any recent books you've been...
I just finished Station 11,
Okay.
which is fabulous. Post-apocalyptic world after everybody dies from a virulent flu. And then what happens when society rebuilds? Really good.
Wow. So science fiction-ish.
Science fiction-ish, yeah. Okay. But a really interesting story with good characters.
All right.
And actually, I guess I listened to Welcome to Night Vale, too, which is on that whole science fiction alternate reality world.
So that you just dig that world, kind of?
I do. Yeah. I like things that are not too grounded in reality.
Okay.
Almost in every part of my life, actually, not just in podcasts.
Oh, that's interesting. So how is that, like, were you like that as a kid, too?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
What are some examples?
I was a voracious reader as a kid with a very active fantasy life. And I wasn't even a little bit athletic. So I would spend every recess hiding under my desk reading a book.
Oh, my gosh.
And often I would have no real understanding of where I was. And I'd always be surprised when class would start and I would not be, in the woods or on a ship or wherever I was in my book.
You were in it. Like
I
you
was
were there.
I was totally in it.
Yeah. That reminds me of the NeverEnding Story, right? The
Yeah.
movie where like he goes up in the attic and like he's sitting and looking at the book. And then as the viewer of the movie, we go into the actual world.
Right. You get sucked in.
Yeah, which is so cool because that's kind of what happens when you read a good book and what was happening for you. Did your teachers have any problem with that?
No, because I was real quiet.
Okay.
And I tended to turn in my homework when I remembered, and that was good enough for them. I didn't cause problems because I was under my desk. It was more a question of where is she? And I feel certain there were times when, in fact, I was not under my desk and they just assumed I was.
Yeah, right. It's because she's fine, not a squeaky wheel.
Right, exactly. Just leave her alone. She's fine.
And that was perfectly fine for you.
It was. It was until I got older, and then it continued to read 1 or 2 books a day through middle school and high school. And it turns out they wanted me to do the schoolwork at that point, and we butted heads.
Okay, so lots of things not completely grounded in reality. As a kid, you were like into books and stories and storytelling. Now it's audio books and even podcasts. You said kind of in lots of parts. What was your brain thinking there?
Well, I was thinking actually of my art. So when I was growing up, I spent a lot of time in Central America and Mexico, which the whole art world there is not terribly grounded in reality. It's actually, they call it magical realism. So you'll have things like a living room with a boat floating through it, and, the furniture is made up entirely out of birds, right?
Yeah.
And you look at it and first you're like, oh, that makes sense. And then you look at it a little bit longer and you're like, no, that really doesn't make sense. But it works.
Yeah.
And that's been my visual inspiration and kind of how I approach the world in general. I'm like, I'm not going to worry too much if it doesn't make sense as long as it works.
And sometimes it makes sense to you but doesn't make sense to someone else. Or sometimes, I feel like I see some artwork like you're talking about where it came from a dream.
Yeah.
Or so that's
totally
grounded for the artist. Like it came from this place that was a real thing. Or maybe it's a collage of ideas or a bringing together of different things that the artist understands and the viewer may or may not understand the artist's perspective, but certainly gets their own.
But they get their
it.
own, right? Exactly, and that's kind of the whole point of art, right? Is to make you think and to have your own personal experience out of it.
Yeah. Do you find that viewers of your pieces, when you're lucky enough to hear their perspective, see it the same way as you most of the time, or see it completely different?
I would say in general they see it different, and in general each one sees it differently, which I love. I mean, that's what I'm going for. I tend to make a lot of things that are, they might be an animal with a trunk and tentacles and spines in the back, and people say, well, what is it? Like, no, get over that. Like,
right. What do you feel like it is? What is it to you? Is that kind of the
exactly. Get away from the box. Don't think inside the box. There are no boxes. Think it can be whatever you want it to be.
So give our listener a sense of what like a piece that you've created looks like. What's the medium? What's the experience they have when they check out a piece you've done?
So I tend to work in almost everything. Okay. Whatever is near at hand is the medium that I'm working in.
Yeah.
Glass is my preferred medium, and blown glass is my preferred medium, just because it's such fun to work with molten glass. You get a real adrenaline rush. You're also warm, which is nice.
We're currently sitting in a very cold recording studio, it's very much the opposite of the feeling that we're having in this space.
I mean, yesterday I was blowing glass and I was wearing shorts, right? And it was 30 degrees out.
Sure.
When I start with a piece, usually I get my best ideas when I'm lying in bed right between waking up and getting up.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's this time where I lay in and I think of what it could be and what it's, how to put it together and the technical aspects of it. Then I get to the studio and I tell my assistants, here's what I think I'm making today. So it's got, giant bulbous head, googly eyes. It's got 6 legs. It's wearing a top hat. And it may or may not have a tongue. I'm just not sure. Let's see how this goes. And then you start making stuff. And kind of like wood carvers and stone carvers say the piece is already in the wood or in the stone and then it comes out. In glass, it's somewhat the same. You start putting stuff together and you're like, no, I think I'm done. Or, oh, hey, the one side fell off. Okay, well, now let's reorient the whole thing going a different way. Or, oh, wait, look, there's this little fold in it. And let's make that, it needs 2 noses. That would be better. Yeah. So there's definitely, I go into things with ideas, but by the time I'm done with it, there's no guarantee it's going to look anything like what I started out as.
I love that. I was an elementary school art teacher for 6 or 7 years, and that was one of the things you try and teach kids is like this idea there's no mistakes or whatever.
Right.
And I think that really is true. Like, hey, take this thing that you're frustrated about a mess up because you're a 6 or 7 year old who's developing this idea that there's a right and wrong in the way that you do things, which there is in lots of things, but in art not quite so much. Like in a lot of ways it's like, okay, this was a little mess up. In your mind, how can we change this to where is the work taking us? Where is the piece taking us? And how can we evolve our idea of what it was supposed to be into kind of what it maybe wants to be?
Right. And I always tell that with my students that if it's a mistake if you do it once. Do it again and it's not a mistake, right? Just own it. Be like, hey, this is the thing that I did. Yeah. And I'm good with it.
You hear in music a lot where people are writing music or playing, where they hit a wrong note. Right. And then it's like, well, if I hit that wrong note again and then play from there, suddenly it becomes this new concept, this new song. And that's how I got this lick that I didn't even think of, really. It just came to me.
Yeah. You just got to go with that. Go with the crazy feelings.
So that's really some of the sources of your art. And we started the conversation by saying you like this idea of not being grounded in a hard reality almost, but that it's somewhat malleable. As you were growing up, you were reading a lot, you were in that space. Did you know you wanted to be an artist? Like where was the point where you were like, oh, I like this and I want to do this?
I don't know that there was a particular point at which I wanted to be an artist. And I would even say there's still not a particular point I want to be an artist. I was a kid who always made things. Yeah. My stepmother claims that I taught myself to knit at age 5. And I don't think that's true, but I do know my first knitting project was a cable knit sweater because I couldn't be bothered to say make a scarf or a square or anything else. I'm like, how hard can it be?
So you made a complex, for those who don't know how to make a cable knit sweater, that is a complex knitting experience as opposed to like a simple scarf or something.
Right. And that's always how I've approached everything. So I'm like, well, I've never done stone carving before. Let's carve an alligator. They're like, right. Why don't you carve something square first? I'm like, no, I don't want anything square. Let's carve an alligator and let's have it,
And so always went there.
Always. And so as a kid, I was always making things. From before I can remember, I was always creating things. Was it because I had a lot of nervous energy? I don't know. But I was always making things with my hands. And what I discovered, certainly by high school, is I'm a kinetic learner. Yeah. Which means that I learn through my hands. And so I would make stuff during class to take in information, often sweaters, actually, or do a quilt.
Was it the hand movement? Like I'm knitting and someone's teaching me about math or about the history of the United States or about whatever. And because my hands are moving, it's helping me to absorb this other information? Or is the information like actually coming through your hands in that experience?
In some ways, it's actually coming through my hands. And one of the things I think is interesting is I will do a complex project that might take me months to do, right? And then I go back to the beginning part of it, and I can hear the lecture that I heard when I did that beginning part.
Oh, wow.
So that's the way it cements things in my head. I do a lot of audiobooks, and if I'm doing a multi-part project, I might have something where I'm doing one part for a month, the next part for a month, and the next part for a month. And when I'm doing the last part, if I'm touching the pieces from the first part, I can remember the chapter of the audiobook that I was listening to. Wow. I don't have the ability to not create.
Yeah.
That's
always been
That's
there.
always been there. And it's always been either art or cooking. Those are my two loves. So for years, I worked as a caterer, and I worked as a baker, and I worked as a high-end cook. So I enjoyed creating beautiful visuals and creating things that people wanted to take into their homes. And I think that influenced my art in a lot of ways, because a lot of artists these days make art that is unapproachable or is designed to make you think, all in capital letters, right? And have a deep experience and possibly be unsettled. Food is designed to make you feel good about the world.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
You want a food experience in which you come away fulfilled, and every part of it is sensuous and delightful and just makes you happy, right? That's what you're looking for from food. You're very rarely going to a food experience and thinking, I want to think about man's inhumanity to man while I eat this, right?
Right. They're not going to, I mean, a chef could delight you or come at things from there's lots of creative angles to take food from, but one of them is not like apocalyptic. The world is going to end.
Right.
What are you going to do about it?
You ever so often you'll be like, we're going to have a starvation dinner to make you think of people who have it worse than you do. But in general, that's not how it goes.
Right.
And I realized that has influenced my art. I'm not interested in making art that makes people anxious or awkward. I want art to be the sort of thing that you look at it and think, I want that. I want to touch it. I want to experience. I want to have a moment with it. It makes me feel better about the world. And tomorrow it will make me feel better about the world. And I also basically understand what's going on. Because I don't know if you've ever had food where you take a bite and you're like, oh, that's octopus, and it looked like it was a chocolate-covered strawberry, and now I am sad, right?
Right. Yeah.
And I don't want people to have that with the art either. And I know some people do. So it's definitely influenced me. But.
Yeah. One thing you can do a little bit more with visual art than you can with food is what you just described. Like have something that looks one way, and then when you dig a little deeper, it takes you to a complete other place. And that I think a lot of art is not that. Like you kind of want someone to interpret it and experience it maybe the way you expected it or you wanted to set it up, but at least somewhere in that realm of having a delightful experience or having a type of experience that you put there.
Yeah.
You don't want to like throw a curveball at them. I think I just spoke in a circle there, but you know,
but you involve the word curve, so it's okay if you speak in a circle.
Right. A circle is 4 curves, I believe, and I think that's just what happened
Nicely
in that conversation. I want to dig into a story real quickly before we go to break. That you lived in New Orleans, and really you were a part of Hurricane Katrina there, and that affected you in multiple ways. And I wonder if you would just describe that a little bit.
Sure. So I lived in New Orleans. I was running a glassblowing studio down there, but I wasn't actually there when Hurricane Katrina hit. I was up in Maine doing a 2-week glassblowing class, which in some ways was awesome.
So you had a studio in New Orleans, but you were not present for
I was
Katrina.
not present for Katrina.
I can see why that's sort of awesome, but also not awesome.
Also not awesome. And one of the ways it was not awesome was I didn't evacuate. I just went to camp. So if you go to camp, you bring 5 grubby shirts, 2 grubby pairs of shorts, and a pair of sneakers because you're at camp.
You're going to be gone
If
for 5
you're
days.
evacuating, you're bringing all your stuff with you.
Right.
So I really had this experience where I was in the woods and discovered that there was this thing happening.
Wow.
I didn't interact with it in the same way that so many of my friends did who left New Orleans, who took their stuff, who had to find a place to stay. I had a place to stay. I was in a bunk.
Who were experiencing a closure. They may not have known how much that closure was going to be because they didn't know how bad the hurricane was going to be. But
right, exactly. We all assumed it wouldn't be that big a deal. And so I came into the process kind of halfway through with no prep. And so I didn't have anything with me, and I suddenly had to figure out what I was doing. You know, where was I going to live? What was I going to do? The thing about a hurricane, which is different than, say, a house fire. A house fire destroys your house, but you probably still have your job, right? A hurricane wipes out everything. So it disperses your friends, it destroys your job, it floods your house, all that. So suddenly I had to figure out all of that. I was really lucky. I was at camp with one of the best glassblowers in the country. And he took me home and gave me a job working for someone I in no way had the skills to work for. But he felt sorry for me, and he gave me a job that I genuinely would not have gotten otherwise.
In Maine?
No, actually in north of Seattle.
Okay, so in a totally different place than you were before.
Totally different place than I was.
You went to a camp, and Hurricane Katrina happened, and you were fortunate enough to be offered a job and taken in by someone, but you were still in a completely different town, with a completely different life.
Yep.
And I think so many people had that experience from Katrina, and maybe there's other examples of hurricanes that have done the same. There certainly are, but Katrina was one of those where so many people just
a huge diaspora. You have basically 1 million people who are suddenly forced to go somewhere else. And one of the other things by not evacuating, a lot of people who evacuated, you go as far as you can drive.
Yeah.
Which means you basically stay in the South and you stay near other people who also were from New Orleans. I was in the far northeast corner of the country, and I went to the absolute far northwest corner, and there were no other people from New Orleans. Nobody who had had that same experience, nobody to share that with.
Yeah.
I also say, if you're going to lose everything, your community, your home, your job, all that stuff, don't move to an island in the Pacific Northwest during winter. You want to think about a more depressing place to be. It's gray, it rains every day, and everybody wears black.
Yeah, right.
And I just come from New Orleans, where everybody wears like gold lame leopard skin, and that's normal. And so that was hard. But it was also fabulous because I was the refugee, and everybody wanted to be nice to the refugees. So all of the artists in the area gave me jobs. And I worked for some of the best artists in the country. And I was, at the time, I was very aware that that was an amazing opportunity. And I just sucked up as much information as I could. And anybody who would teach me, I let them teach me. And it ended up being absolutely amazing, other than the depression and the darkness and all of that.
Yeah, I think that so many times people tell some kind of story in that way, right? Where you have this, terrible thing happen to you. I mean, obviously it didn't affect your personal health or anything like that. So there could have been much worse things. Yeah. But your entire life was changed by one scenario. And then like something good comes out of it, right? And so the good that came out of for you was the evolution of your artistic endeavor, your experience with the art world and the things that you love. And you were able to have some opportunities that you wouldn't have had that not happened, right? So that's
Yeah, it was pretty amazing.
It doesn't make it suck any less.
It doesn't make it suck any less. That is true, but it makes for a good story.
Yeah.
And,
well,
if you're going to have something horrible happen to you, you better have it be a good story at the end.
It is neat how just stuff that happens, like it turns into something really, some kind of positive. Yeah. Maybe it's because we yearn for that. Maybe because like our spirits are like when we have hardship, like somehow that the yin and yang of life and all that kind of stuff, like your yin is really low. And so like the yang side is like trying to find you, right? And so like so often the hardship brings some positive thing almost because like the two spiritual spaces are aligning. Right. I don't know, something like that. But.
I don't know. I think so much of it is just attitude. Like I probably actually had all sorts of horrible things happen to me in life. But in general, if you asked me if I had had anything horrible happen to me, I would probably say no. Like I don't even think of Katrina as a horrible thing. Yeah. Although it was not my best time of life. Yeah, but I've always been one of those people who very much sees the silver lining in absolutely everything.
Yeah, I think it's so that's just a perspective thing. You could have gone really dark and that would have been reasonable and no one would have blamed you.
Right.
Yeah,
know.
Yeah.
I came away with it pretty much good, except for an almost pathological hatred of black mold. And if there's any smell of mold anywhere, I just freak out.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, that makes sense.
That's the one thing that really held with me is I simply cannot deal with mold in any way at all.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand. As an insurance agent, I talk about mold a lot.
I bet you do, yes.
Yeah. And so sometimes, like recently I was talking with someone who had some water damage in their basement, and they were like trying to take care of it themselves. And that conversation goes on a lot. It's like, okay, well, how do we navigate this insurance or this water damage situation? I'm like, well, the bottom line, I say this to everybody, the bottom line is you do not want to leave moisture in your house and end up 3 months from now dealing with a mold situation. Nope. And so here's one avenue. Avenue A, you deal with this all on your own.
Right.
The potential downside is 3 months from now you've got a mold problem.
Right.
Not saying you shouldn't do that, but that's one option.
Yeah, right.
And the other option is we bring
right.
professionals in. We make sure that it's dried out. Yeah, it's going to cost a lot of money, and it's going to be an insurance claim. And
right.
But I think there's a lot of
such a difference.
Yeah.
So. No, in my house in New Orleans was a really cheap house. It was old. It was 1910, and it was plaster, and the floorboards, there was no subfloor.
Yeah.
You could actually just look through to the ground down below.
Even when
always. That was a normal day, right?
Wow,
you could just look through, and it was very, very cheaply made.
Yeah.
And my 4 doors down neighbor, who was my best friend, she'd renovated her whole house. It was gorgeous inside, the beautiful hardwood floors and drywall. Well, if your house gets flooded, plaster does not absorb water.
Okay.
And if you don't have a subfloor, there's nothing to hold it in. So my house was a giant sieve. So
Right.
all of the water ran out, and my house was
went.
fine. And her house, she had drywall, sucked up. She had insulation. It sucked up the water.
Yeah,
the
totally.
floorboards were. And I was like, for once, having something really cheap and kind of crappy served me well. There's a reason in New Orleans they built like that. Oh, I get that now.
Right.
If you're going to live on a floodplain.
Yeah, maybe let the water run through.
Exactly.
Interesting. So we're going to take a quick break.
All right.
And when we come back, we're going to dig into the world of art. So the modern world of creativity and some of the things we've kind of already been talking about. But we're going to kind of focus in on that. Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
All right. Scratch Entrepreneur is brought to you by Shine Insurance. At Shine, our goal is simple: to change the way you feel about insurance. Start that evolution today at shineinsurance.com. All right, we're back with Abby Gitlitz. She is an artist, glassblower, the founder of the Bloomington Creative Glass Center, better known as BCGC.
That's it.
Abby, thank you again so much for being with us. So let's talk about the world of fine art. And when I was thinking about what you do and how to connect with kind of modern world of fine art, I thought about really the idea that so much of the art world is supported by not-for-profits.
Yes.
And that includes you. You're a not-for-profit, and what you've done with the BCGC, and all the way up almost to like the Whitney, right?
Yeah.
That's also a not-for-profit where you can go and see amazing, wonderful works of art that have lots of value. But even at the highest levels of the art world, it's still kind of a not-for-profit thing. Now, there's obviously for-profit pieces, and you can make money and all those kinds of things. But my mind was cycling around this idea. Does that resonate? I mean, why is it that so much of the art world has to be supported by not-for-profit work?
Well, I think it depends on what you're thinking of when you're looking at the art world. So what you're talking about is the art world that has a public component, right? So if you're trying to make art accessible to the public,
right,
you need a way for the public to see it, and you can charge them a lot of money. That's one way to do it.
Yeah.
But then you have just cut off a huge percentage of the people. And if you're trying to get art to those people who would not normally see art, you've got to find some way to make it accessible to them, right?
Yeah.
That's the not-for-profit world. There's a for-profit world of the bankers and real estate people in Wall Street who have bought Van Goghs, who bought Monets and hang them in their living rooms, and none of us will ever see them.
Right.
Right? And that's the other world. But if you're talking about this idea of making art accessible to the public, you're already assuming that most of the people who you're going to come into contact with are not going to give you any money. Right? If you're trying to get kids interested in art, well, you can just cross all that off in terms of, kids don't have money.
There aren't any loaded kids out there.
Very few loaded kids. And the ones who, like even kids that you got $5, right?
Yeah,
they're not going to spend it to go to a museum.
Yeah.
So that's part of it is trying to figure out how to get that art to people who either don't know they want it, or they want it, but they can't afford it, or they want it, but don't have a way to access it. And that's where nonprofits come in.
Well, that's really interesting, because if you go back through history, I mean, really the church, in the 1600s or whatever, provided that same basic concept where in their scenario, they were trying to tell Bible stories or Greek myths or whatever the pieces were. But those were the best fine artists, and where they worked were at the church or for the church.
Sure.
To provide the same kind of space, a free space to see art or see the work. That maybe there's a connection there, maybe there's not.
Yeah. Well, and this idea of artists making art for themselves is a very recent thing, right?
Tell me more about that. What artists making art for themselves?
So it used to be, if you were an artist, you were hired by the church or by another religious institution, if we're talking non-Western world, right? Because most of the world makes art.
Yeah.
Or you were hired by a patron. So think of the Medicis.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
And the Medicis were getting this art for churches, but they weren't getting it because they were religious. They were getting it because they wanted to say, hey, we want to prove we have a lot of money. Therefore, we're going to hire an artist to paint. Yeah. Or the artist would be on hire, and the artist would be in charge of educating the kids, teaching the kids, and making whatever laudatory art it was that the person wanted. So you think of Goya, right? Early Goya stuff with painting all of the Spanish house of the Habsburgs, who are just wildly unflattering pictures. And you have to think he was painting them as flatteringly as he could. How much more ugly were they in real life, right? But you didn't, if you were an artist, you didn't just make stuff and just make stuff and hope somebody liked it.
You were doing something for someone else.
If you were an artist, you were working for somebody, and you were a craftsperson, and that's how you were seen.
Which is the foundation of almost all trades.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was a trade.
Yeah.
And you look at glass and the whole world of glass blowing. I mean, that was very much a trade, and it was very tightly controlled. Yeah. You had guilds. You didn't get to just go off and be your own glass artist and make your own thing. Like, that didn't happen.
Yeah. Over the course of most of history, if you were like, I'm just going to go be an artist for myself to paint cool stuff, there would have been so many barriers, and society would have just looked at you and been like, what are you talking about? It would be like saying you want to be everything I thought of, be a chef. Well, actually, you probably could, or like you want to be an insurance agent just for yourself. Right.
That's
a better analogy. There you go.
That's a weird thing to do. Why are you doing that? How are you affording it? Yeah. No, it's not. So the whole idea of making art for yourself is really recent. And I kind of miss the whole idea of having patrons. And that's what nonprofits are doing now, right?
Yeah.
They're trying to find the patrons to fund the art so that the public can see it.
So it's bringing back around. It's almost like we lost the trade element of art because of lots of things, really. Now there's photography. Now there's other things that can fill some of the spaces that the trade element was filling. Right. And so now not-for-profits are kind of coming into the space and saying, hey, now that art is more of a do for one's self, has more of that element, let's make sure people can still see it. Let's make sure we can still fund it, and make sure we can still give people the opportunity to learn it if that's what they want to do. Exactly. Oh man, you just blew my mind there. Okay, cool. And so that's what you're really doing with the BCGC, is helping folks to have access to one particular medium, which is glass, right? Right. So I make art, but making art is not my actual love. My love is teaching people about art, sharing art with other people. So BCGC's mission is to create a space that does high quality glass arts education for the people of Southern Indiana. So this idea of, you want to learn how to make it? Fine. You want to make your own stuff? Great. You want to make a giant octopus? We will help you figure out the steps to do it. Yeah. But we're not going to make it and then try and sell it to you. Our goal is for you to make your own art, for you to think about what's interesting to you. So the intention of the business is really to help teach people to make their own stuff. You're not necessarily trying to sell out of that space. It's like, teaching people how to do it.
Right. We do have a gallery. So if you want to come buy glass, we're all about that too, because the gallery, the funds also go back to support the mission of glass art education. But yeah, you want to come buy some holiday ornaments, or, a Mother's Day glass flower, or someone's graduating in your life and you need to get them something. We have that. And we have glass from artists all over Indiana.
Yeah, cool.
So that is a component of it. But our primary thing is teaching people how to make things out of glass. Yeah. And glass is different than a lot of other arts. I mean, you've played with clay, right?
Yeah.
And you started when you were how old?
Pretty young.
Yeah, probably before you remember, right? You were playing with mud outside until a parent came and ran outside and was like, don't put that in your mouth.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. My mom would make me come in a lot. Yeah.
Right. And probably as soon as you found a knife, you probably started cutting wood because it seemed like a fun thing to do.
Yeah, or a bar of soap, I think.
Or a bar of soap,
Scout,
right? Carving things, you probably did that. Yeah. And you probably bent things out of wire, be it only a twist tie, and you look down and you're like, oh, look, it looks like a bicycle. That's really cool.
I've continued to bend things out of wire into my adult life. Yes.
So we tend to have opportunities to interact with a lot of different types of materials.
Yeah.
But the one type of material almost no one interacts with is glass. Because think what happens when you came around broken glass as a kid. What was the first thing your parents said?
Stay away from it.
Right. Don't touch that. It's sharp.
Right.
Yeah. So early on, we're taught this fear of glass. It's sharp. Don't touch it. You can't do anything with it. Just if it's broken, throw it away. And otherwise, don't touch it. Oh, don't touch that face. That's grandma's face. What are you doing? Put that down. Right.
Yeah.
So we're indoctrinated early on that that's not a material we get to touch. So it makes it a little more difficult to teach classes if the first thought that people have is, oh, no, I can't touch that.
There's this immediate barrier to entry.
It's immediate barrier to entry.
Yep.
So I thought, well, that sounds like a fun thing to teach, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot more interesting to teach the things that people don't think they're allowed to touch.
Well, because it is, you do cross over into this world, and it's into the mosaic style, it's into the collage style, but it's also with this material that is inherently, might I say, hard to deal with too.
Yeah. Oh,
I mean, that's another side of it.
It's a total pain in the butt.
Yeah.
Every part of it.
Yeah.
Every part of it. And I keep saying that's why I keep working with glass. It's the one material that continues to challenge me. I figured out how to knit a sweater the first time I did it.
Right.
Okay. The arms are a little long. I get that. But I got the basic concept, right? Glass, there's so much to it. There's so much to learn. And there's so many different avenues to approach it, and you can make it do almost anything. And that's the other thing people don't realize about glass. They think at first, they're like, well, you can do a window, you can do a cup, but you can do almost, if you can think of it, we can figure out how to make it out of glass.
Because you can melt it, you can bend it, you can roll it, you can so
cut
many
it,
different things you can mess with, but you do have to learn how to do that.
You do have to learn how to do that. And then you have to have the equipment. And that's the other big barrier for glass, is that unlike clay, where you really can dig stuff in your backyard if you have the right vein of clay back there.
Right.
For glass, you actually need a lot of specialized equipment.
And we're going to take a quick break, but we're going to talk about that when we come back, because you have found a way to bring some specialized equipment to our town of Bloomington, Indiana, or you've opened a space. And so we'll dig into that, dig into a little bit of the business ownership and stuff like that too. I think we're going there. We'll take a quick break and continue to go there.
Continue to go there. Sounds good.
Okay, cool. Hey, Jeremy here. Quick ad for Shine Insurance. And what I'm going to do again is talk about a claim and how to handle it. I think for your business, I want to talk about a coverage that you should definitely have, and that is called loss of income coverage. And what happens is if you have a business and you cannot do business because of a covered claim, water came pouring through your ceiling at your restaurant, and suddenly your restaurant is closed for 2 weeks, there is coverage in your policy for the lost income for that period of time. You should check right now and make sure you have that coverage. So if you're ever in that situation, your insurance policy covers the lost income during that period of time. All right. If you need any more information about your business insurance, feel free to check us out, shineinsurance.com. Now let's get back to the show. And we're back with Abby Gitlitz, who is the founder of the Bloomington Creative Glass Center, the BCGC. She's also an artist, glass blower herself. Thanks, Abby, so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
We kind of moved over into the glass world and left the art world, which was fine with me. But I think I could talk about both of these forever.
Oh, yeah. I'm there with you. I can keep going.
Cool.
and talk about the world of art glass, the history of glass. Good Lord. I mean, that's a whole nother world.
It is a whole, that I don't know a ton about. I mean, as an elementary art teacher, obviously it was, you know, some of these similar barriers, right? Certainly we weren't making glass vases. I mean, we did some like mosaic work or glass, like pane glass, you know, where you're not manipulating the glass really at all, except for breaking it. And but that was really it. I mean, really, to be able to kiln fire clay was a higher end version of elementary art,
right?
You know?
Sure, yeah. You just don't. If you don't have the equipment, you don't have the tools, you don't have the resources, and you don't want little kids cutting themselves,
right?
Oh. We make them sign white waivers, so we're, you know.
Yeah, you got that piece.
Go for it. Play with the glass. Have fun. See what it does. I got Band-Aids. You're good to go.
It's going to be okay. There's a part where you tell people not to do stuff, right? And then there's a part where they learn not to do it.
Right.
And it's like, how can I tell enough, but keep my mouth shut enough so that they can lightly hurt them or somehow, and I don't even want to say that, obviously, because you don't ever want anyone to hurt themselves, but it is the best way to learn why not to do something.
Right. It's a very visceral experience that really stays with you. Well, I say to anybody who's going to work glass, I guarantee you'll get hurt.
Yeah.
I mean, unlike most art classes where they say, no, it'll be fine. I guarantee you that if you stick with it, at least once you'll burn yourself and at least once you'll cut yourself.
Sure.
And just know that going in, it's not going to be a bad burn. It's not going to be a bad cut, but just don't be surprised when it happens.
Well, yeah. Playing a guitar, like you're going to callus your fingers. Right. That's slightly different because it's not like a hurt.
Right.
But,
I don't know. I learned guitar. It hurt a lot. Until you get those calluses, it's a very painful experience.
There's some of that stuff as well.
Yeah.
So you have opened the Creative Glass Center, which did not have a ton of equipment in the beginning.
No.
And you've said that one of the barriers, there's a couple of barriers to working with glass. One is the idea that we are not supposed to touch glass and are brought up with this idea, right?
Yeah.
And the other is simply that there's a lot of equipment that comes with working with it. And so how have you found a way to bring glass blowing and glass creative experiences to people in Bloomington?
A lot of hard work and a lot of fundraising is the basics of that. I have been blowing glass for about 20 years, and I moved back to Bloomington in 2009, and there's no glass in Bloomington. There are a couple people who make glass jewelry and sell it. There are a couple people who make stained glass and sell it, but there's really nothing. There's no art glass scene. There's none of that.
Yeah.
And I knew I wanted that. So I started looking around to see what there was. And there's a glass blowing studio up in Indianapolis that will rent time. So you can rent the studio. Yeah. So I started going up there, and people started asking me, will you teach me how?
Yeah. And you were making pumpkins.
And I was making pumpkins.
So you tell us a little bit about the glass pumpkins, because it was a big deal in Bloomington.
It was. It is.
It is a big deal.
It is a big deal. 2019, October 12th on the Courthouse Square. Save the date, 10 to 3.
Cool.
The Gray Glass Pumpkin Patch is not my idea.
Okay.
The first one, as far as I know, was started at the Bay Area Glass Institute in San Francisco in 1999.
Oh, interesting.
They developed it, and then the next year MIT started doing it as well.
So describe the Great Glass Pumpkin Patch concept.
So the Great Glass Pumpkin Patch concept is a team of glass blowers, in our case it's about 30 people, spend 11 months making glass pumpkins, just huge quantities of glass pumpkins. And you make them every size, you make them every color, you make them every shape. After a while, you make some gourds too, either because you're tired of making pumpkins or because something happened and we just call it a gourd. It's fine. It'll be fine.
This one's a gourd.
Yeah. What kind of gourd? Don't ask me those questions. So we make a ton of pumpkins. We put them all in boxes.
Yeah.
And then on one day of the year, we take them to a lovely green location and we spread them all out on the lawn like a real pumpkin patch, and people can come and pick their own. Yeah. And it's awesome. It's so much fun. So I learned at MIT because I was at MIT for 7 years blowing glass. And then when I went to grad school, I started it at grad school, the program there. And then when I moved to Bloomington, I was like, well, you know what brings people like pumpkins and people like glass pumpkins. And so they think, oh, I can bring people to this. This is a great both money maker, but a great way to get people excited about glass as a whole.
Well, just to expose people to this idea of
Exactly.
glass blowing and everything else.
Right.
I do have to pause for a quick second. And you just said that you blew glass for 5 years at MIT.
7, yeah.
7 years at MIT. Was that did you go to MIT?
I did not actually go to MIT. For a long time, I was the only person in no way associated with MIT blowing glass there.
Okay. I just had to pause on that.
Yeah, it's a little weird.
Yeah.
This would go back to the hard work part. I really wanted to blow glass. I've been doing stained glass for 10 years at this point. I wanted to learn how to blow glass.
Yeah.
My roommate's brother blew glass at MIT. And
What do you blue glass like was taking
up
a
with that?
class?
Yeah.
Like there was a course at MIT? Is there an art
was
department at MIT?
No, it's part of the material sciences department. So if you are someone who, say, is going to go into fiber optics, or you are going to work on making coatings for the space shuttle, you better know how glass works, right?
Oh, cool.
So,
Okay.
so it's part of the material sciences department for people who are going into technical careers. And it started out with people like working with the raw ingredients, making their own stuff, testing things. But over the years, it morphed into a non-credit art class.
Oh, interesting.
Because there is no art degree at MIT.
Sure, but for the purpose of most of these folks are understanding a material that they'll use in a
Exactly.
technical
How's it
way
going
in the
to
future.
move all that stuff?
Ah, okay, cool.
So they have a class. They let in 16 people per semester. It's a lottery system. Usually about 100 people try to get in.
Yeah.
And there's 16 spaces, all reserved for MIT people.
Right.
But my friend who was part of this program, and he actually helped teach, he was faculty at MIT, he said, we have to rebuild the main piece of equipment, the furnace. And if you wanted to come help, maybe you could work something out. So I showed up. I was the second person there. I worked all day, hard, heavy work, built a furnace. I was the last person to leave. And after that, they felt they owed me.
That's great. So you got to blow glass at
So
MIT.
I got into the class. And once I got my foot in the door, I simply never left. I just kept showing up. And they're like, she's here again. What do we do? I better teach her how to do some glass. And after a while, I knew enough. And then they let me help teach. And after a while, they gave me a key.
Wow.
And so
that's a really cool story.
It was awesome. I just talked my way into it. I do that a lot. I talk my way into things, and people are like, she seems to know what she's talking about.
Yeah.
We better go along with what she's saying.
It's like gumption or whatever the right word is. It's like, do it.
Just
go
do
and
it.
try and do it. And until someone says no, it means, you know.
Right. Ask for forgiveness rather than permission.
Yeah.
And usually
absolutely.
it works out. And ever so often, catastrophically, it doesn't. But usually it works out just fine.
Yeah. So let's go back to the glass
center.
Glass
the pumpkin patch. Yes.
And so that was something that was happening in San Francisco, kind of around the country, was this idea that lots of artists came together, blew pumpkin.
Right. And then people want to buy them.
And people want to buy them. Probably raised money for lots of different endeavors and things of that nature.
Right. So when I was in grad school, we raised all of the money for our whole visiting artist program.
Okay.
Right.
Cool.
That's how we funded it. We made pumpkins, and then we got to bring in all these artists and offer free opportunities for the students.
Cool.
So here in Bloomington, I thought, oh yeah, let's do this. Let's see how this works. So we did it the first year. We had 198 pumpkins. I made all of them. We had 10 volunteers helping, of which 4 were family members and 2 were middle schoolers. I mean, it was a very small thing.
That's great.
We had 198 pumpkins, and we sold all but, I think, 9 of them. To give you an idea, this year we had 1,155 pumpkins, and we sold all but 7 of them.
Wow.
And we
That's
had
so awesome.
about 80 volunteers involved. So it's really grown. And it's a great public relations piece, right?
Yeah.
We had we had over 1,200 people come to it. We had people waiting in line. People started waiting in line at 7 a.m. for an event that opens at 10 a.m.
I remember seeing that line. Yeah, absolutely.
And so that has been a major piece of our outreach, because people come for the pumpkins, right? And then we're like, hey, did you know we also do all of this other stuff? Since you're standing here in line anyway, let us tell you about these other things that we do. And people have gotten really excited about it, and they've gotten hooked, and they bring their friends, and they're like, hey, come, let's do this thing. And then let's check out what else they have.
Wow. What percentage of your fundraising happens at that one event?
In the past or now? So for the
way.
first 7 years, or the first 6 years, 100% of our fundraising comes from
that event. Really
that was
broad.
it.
Yeah.
Because we didn't have a place here in Bloomington, right?
Yeah.
So we were just banking money so that we could get something here in Bloomington. But we didn't have a place to run classes, so we weren't bringing in money from classes. We didn't have a place to run events. We didn't have a place for a gallery. Starting in 2016, I decided to kick it up a notch. We got a board of directors. We started applying for grants and getting grants.
Yeah.
We started to do programming that wasn't pumpkins, and then started doing other things.
Yeah.
We do kids programs. We do library programs. One summer I did 44 library programs.
What do you do at the library around glass?
So much fun. We do this program called The Science of Silica. It's designed for 3rd through 6th graders.
Okay.
And we're actually talking about the science, which is what happens if you learn how to blow glass at MIT, right?
Yeah,
you start thinking science is really cool. And when I went to art school and everyone's like, I don't care about the science. I'm like, but you should.
There's so much to it, especially a medium like glass, which has a ton of science behind it.
Right. And if you don't understand the science, everything you're going to make is going to break. Like really, you need to learn this stuff.
Yeah.
But so the science of silica, we talk about the different states of matter. So liquid, gas, and solid, and why glass doesn't really fit into any of those quite right. And so, you break that down. And so we get the kids to be atoms. Mm-hmm. And when they're solid, they all have to stand in straight lines. And when they're liquids, they get to run around within a contained area. And when they're a gas, they get to run around.
Freak out.
Right, freak out. And then they get to be glass molecules, and that's fun. And then we talk about how color works. And we talk about tension and what tempered glass is, and this idea that glass is super, super strong if you have tension, and they figure out how tension works. Then we blow things up because everything's more fun if you blow things up.
Everything is more fun.
Seriously, it's so much fun watching these kids do this. We hammer on glass with hammers, and then at the end, everybody gets to make a fused glass sun catcher. Cool. But a fused glass sun catcher takes 24 hours to make. And if you're doing a library program, that's not really tenable. So instead of glass, we use crushed Jolly Ranchers. And instead of a furnace, we use a toaster oven, and it takes 15 seconds, and then they get to eat it.
That's really smart. The whole thing. There's like the science behind it. There's understanding the art behind it.
Yeah. There's running around.
Yeah.
Which is important for little kids. And you get to eat some candy at the end. So it's actually, it's a
everything
fabulous program.
Everything is there in that one thing. If you ever, as a listener, if you've ever wanted to do a program for kids, you just heard how to do it.
No, man, you call us up and we run it because we have all the supplies and we're very good at it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So if someone wants to come connect with the Bloomington Creative Glass Center, how can they do so?
So you can volunteer. We're always looking for volunteers, but mainly we offer classes. So we're at 229 West Grimes, which is right next to the Switchyard Park, which is exciting. We're right next to the entrance of the Switchyard Park.
Yeah, huge new park in Bloomington, Indiana, the biggest park by far that we've had in town. It's right in the center of town.
It's going to be huge. And hopefully you'll also be able to recognize this because soon we'll have a big mural on the side of the building. Sweet. We're working on that.
Yeah.
But you can come and take classes, and you can take classes in glass fusing, which is a low barrier, not hot glass thing that ages 5 and up can do.
Cool.
We do glass casting, which is making 3-dimensional forms in glass, but again, not hot. Mm-hmm. And that's 13 and up. Painting on glass, which is 13 on up. Mosaic, which I think is 10 and up. And then glass blowing. And we offer private classes. We offer group classes. We offer drop-in things. So for Valentine's Day, come drop in and make a heart for your loved one.
Sweet.
For Mother's Day, come make a glass flower for your loved one. For any other event, come make whatever you want for your loved one.
It's always a good thing to make something for your loved one.
Exactly.
Like, there's no bad time.
Yes, there's no bad time. Although I will say, for years I've been giving my mother glass because, I've been doing glass for 30 years. Yeah. For every holiday, she gets glass.
Yeah.
And I'm like a little kid. I learned a new skill. I'm like, Mom, I made you this, my first ornament ever. And so a couple of years ago, she came back with the first ornament. She said, can I trade this in for one that looks good? Because I gave her my first one. My first one was really ugly because it was my first one, but I was so proud of it.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah, now she wants the nice stuff since I'm a much better glass blower.
Yeah, I was a collage artist for a while, and my parents, if you go into their house, there are
it's everywhere.
Quite a few
it's
pieces.
Everywhere. Yeah, it's everywhere. But we should also include our website, which is bcgcglass.org, and all of our class information is on there. We also have a gallery people can come check out. Also, if you just would like to underwrite the arts here in Bloomington and help other people have an amazing experience, we are looking for corporate sponsors, and we're happy to have folks underwrite. We do special events for our underwriters, and you can come and have your own private event at our center.
Sweet. And if you want to find that, you can obviously go to those spaces. You can find links to all those in the show notes as well. So, Abby, thank you so much for joining us. It was awesome to have you.
This was great. Thank you.
So the show is about to be over, but the conversation is not. If you'd like to join us in the after show, Abby's going to talk about a few of her favorite artists and why she really likes them. We'll debrief if we missed anything in the conversation or if we just want to dig into some other piece. The after show is at patreon.com/scratchentrepreneur. You can find all of our after shows there as well as other business resources that we have there created by myself and also by some of the guests like Jay Bear and David Quick. So check us out at patreon.com/scratchentrepreneur, and Abby and I are headed over there right now. Special thanks to Abby Gitlitz for sharing the Bloomington Creative Glass story with us. Contributors to this episode include the host, myself, Jeremy Goodrich, music production by Mark Vinton, the audio editing is by Christopher Lang, and the copy editing is by Talia Chakraborty. If you enjoyed this show, there's a couple things we'd love you to do right now. First, subscribe to Scratch Entrepreneur on Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you catch your podcasts. Review the show, and please do share it with your friends. If this episode had a specific interest for someone that you know, pop it out to them so they can listen as well. Please do connect with us. Join the Scratch Entrepreneur group on Facebook, and we can connect right there. Until the next time, we truly appreciate you listening.